Did cinema ever have a stranger view of women than it did in the 1950s? Here, a woman summons her past life as a sea creature. A serum turns a dying patient into something like a murderous Marilyn Monroe. And decades before the substance, an anti-aging experiment goes terribly wrong. Of course, this is all ridiculous, but we cannot skip this little corner of the genre.
It is time, Earthman.
Devil Girl from Mars brings us to the Bonnie Charlie Inn in the Scottish Highlands. Inside, we get the usual 1950s B-movie crowd. Then, Naya arrives from Mars. She explains that after a war between the sexes, women now rule her planet, but the male population has been depleted. So she has come to Earth looking for men to take back and help repopulate Mars. She traps the inn inside a force field, demonstrates the power of her robot, and gives herself 4 hours to repair her ship before moving on to conquer London. And of course, Naya is the whole reason to watch this movie. With Patricia Laffin in a PVC miniskirt and cape, the Devil Girl now looks like a dominatrix from outer space, which was almost certainly not the intention at the time. The robot is hard to ignore too. It looks like a 1950s petrol pump with corrugated arms, and when it finally uses its ray beam, the movie's modest budget becomes pretty obvious. Devil Girl from Mars has earned a reputation as a bad film, but for today's list, that is not exactly a disqualification. And to be fair, even with its absurd moments, it is not much better or worse than other science fiction films made in the same budget range during that decade. Catwoman of the Moon sends a rocket expedition to the dark side of the moon, under the command of Laird Granger. Once they land, the crew finds a moon made of painted backdrops, polystyrene rocks, and giant spiders on wires, waiting to pounce, or at least to be lowered into the shot. There is also plenty of oxygen, which is convenient, since one of the men immediately gets to announce that he is the first guy to breathe on the moon. Navigator Helen Salinger guides them to a cave, where they find a palace inhabited by the Catwomen, dressed in chokers, black leotards, heavy makeup, and widow's peak hair. The Catwomen have never seen men before, so naturally they provide food, drinks, and a dance number. But the hospitality is not exactly innocent. They have been sending telepathic messages to Helen to draw the expedition to them, because they want to steal the spaceship, go to Earth, and liberate the women there. To do that, they need to seduce the secrets of how to operate the rocket away from the men. The special effects are cheap, but mostly passable, especially if you are already on board with the cardboard moon and the dangling spiders. What never becomes convincing are the fight scenes, which have all the intensity of a cautious rehearsal. Even at just over an hour, the film requires a certain amount of patience to make it to the end. But if you're crazy enough to watch this one, go straight on to the 1958 remake, Missile to the Moon. I can even say that it is slightly better. That version keeps the same basic idea. A rocket expedition lands on the moon and finds a dying civilization of moon women who need the Earth rocket. It even reuses the giant spider prop. And as a final touch, the moon women are played by international beauty contest winners, at least according to the credits. A clear story, maybe some kind of point. Mesa of Lost Women decides to do without most of that. I am not even going to pretend I can describe the plot in a clean straight line, because the movie is built out of flashbacks, and then flashbacks inside those flashbacks. But roughly, this is what we are dealing with. A mad scientist in Mexico, played by Jackie Coogan, is working on giant spiders. His plan is to inject women with their venom and create a new species of genetically enhanced super spider women. Peter Parker might want to take a few notes. The two things you are most likely to remember are the non-stop musical score, and Tarantella, the Spider-Woman played by Tandra Quinn, with her long and completely unnecessary dance scene in a tavern. Still, if you love weird movies, Mesa of Lost Women is one of those glorious pieces of trash you probably have to experience at least once. Next we have the she-creature, and this is one I would actually recommend with a little less irony than some of the others on this list. The film centers on creepy carnival hypnotist Carlo Lombardi and poor Andrea Talbot. Lombardi hypnotizes Andrea and sends her back through her past lives. It just so happens that her earliest life was as a sea monster. Using his powers, Lombardi manages to bring that monster into physical form and sends it out to do his dirty work. The she-creature has a strange atmosphere. Some of the regression scenes with Marla English, as Elizabeth's spirit starts to emerge, are genuinely spooky. But the real star of the movie is costume maker Paul Blaisdell. The she-creature suit, affectionately nicknamed Cuddles, is basically a female version of the creature from the Black Lagoon, designed by Millicent Patrick and Bud Westmore. Well, the Astounding She-Monster does involve a female alien. Whether she should really be called a monster is debatable, and I have some questions about astounding, too. The film begins when two criminals abduct heiress Margaret Chaffee. Their car breaks down in the San Gabriel Mountains, so they force their way into the cabin of geologist Dick Cutler. Then a mysterious alien woman appears after a meteorite crashes in the hills. Her radium suit is deadly to anyone she touches, and bullets do not seem to do anything to her. So Cutler and the others have to improvise some way to stop her. A lot of people find the Astounding She-Monster boring, and I cannot really argue with that. The whole thing is pretty stupid. But there is also a simple charm, especially as the cast keeps running in and out of the cabin like that might somehow solve the problem. She has already been a creature. She has already been a monster. And now, she is a devil. It is based on Stanley G. Weinbaum's story, The Adaptive Ultimate, and if you need the plot in the simplest possible terms, it is about a woman who takes an experimental serum and turns into something like a murderous Marilyn Monroe. A little more specifically, Kira Zellis is dying when doctors Dan Scott and Richard Bach test their serum on her. It works, but it also changes her completely. Kira announces that she is going to live the life she always wanted, and she does not waste much time getting started. She mugs a man in a clothing store, uses his money to buy new dresses, and avoids the police by changing the color of her hair. Dan and Richard soon realize they have created someone completely heartless, especially when Kira sets her sights on wealthy Barton Kendall and decides his wife is in the way. The cinematography is occasionally quite clever for its time, and it has a few fun moments, even if some of them are fun for the wrong reasons. Another notable detail is that it comes from Kurt Neumann, who went on to make his best-known film, The Fly, the following year. Let's move on to the delightfully silly Queen of Outer Space, which at least has one advantage right away. It was shot in color and CinemaScope, so compared with most of the films on this list, it looks almost lavish. The story takes place in the far distant future of 1985. Captain Patterson, Lieutenant Cruz, Lieutenant Turner, and Professor Conrad are sent into space on a mission to reach Space Station A. But before they get there, the station is destroyed, and the crew ends up stranded on Venus. There they meet ray gun-toting women in mini-dresses, led by the masked Queen Ilana. She accuses the Earthmen of planning an invasion and sentences them to death. But not everyone on Venus supports the Queen, and some of the women want the men's help in overthrowing her. By the way, if the costumes look familiar, that is because they were borrowed from Forbidden Planet. The filmmakers also borrowed a lot of the spaceship footage, and even some of the giant spider scenes, from World Without End. That one starts with a Mars mission. This one gives us Venus. But with movies like this, let's just call that part of the charm. Attack of the 50-Foot Woman is probably more familiar than most of the films we're talking about today, but leaving it out would still feel wrong. Allison Hayes plays Nancy Archer, a woman who encounters some kind of alien creature while driving late at night. When she gets home, nobody believes her, partly because Nancy already has a reputation for drinking and not being especially stable. During a second encounter with the alien, Nancy is scratched, and for reasons the movie does not exactly make convincing, she starts turning into a giant. Since this is a late 1950s monster movie, radiation is involved, because apparently it had to be. For a while, the main attraction is Nancy's giant hand, and it never looks like anything except a huge foam prop. Reportedly, director Nathan Juran, who had made 20 million miles to Earth, was unhappy enough with the special effects to take the credit as Nathan Hurts. Looking at that hand, you can sort of understand why. And considering the title, there is not actually that much attack. The movie is only a little over an hour long. Nancy does not really make it into public until the very end, and the public rampage is basically saved for the finale. Long before The Substance with Demi Moore, there was The Wasp Woman. I already mentioned The Fly from 1958 earlier, and this feels very much like a quick attempt to cash in on that same success. And naturally, Roger Corman was the man handling it. Susan Cabot, who looks amazing here, plays Janice Starlin, the head of a Manhattan beauty products company that is starting to struggle. Part of the problem, apparently, is that Janice herself is no longer considered young enough to be the perfect face of the brand. So she agrees to fund Dr. Eric Zinthrop's research into royal jelly extracts. After he uses the serum to rejuvenate a cat, Janice insists on trying it herself. And from the title, you can probably guess where this is going. The Wasp Woman was shot in 2 weeks for around $50,000, so this is not exactly a movie you come to with high expectations. To enjoy it, you just have to leave common sense outside the room. No big deal.